afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from in the world. Welcome to Crazy Talk. So if this is your first time tuning into Crazy Talk is a Facebook Live TV show of sorts where I interview all sorts of people about all sorts of things that are related to mental health. I'm your host, Lee Thomas. If this is not your first time watching Crazy Talk, thank you so much for coming back. I'm glad we haven't scared you off yet. I'm really excited today to be joining you from the Healthy Voices Conference in Chicago, where I had the great pleasure of meeting our guest today, Imade, who is with Depressed While Black.
Yes.
Yeah, which is really exciting. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Yeah. It's like, so just so you guys know, we're in like the kind of middle of a hallway in Chicago. So if you hear background noise, that's probably, it's ambiance. Is
right.
What we're going to be calling that. Yeah, absolutely. So Imade, tell us a little bit about kind of, I guess, your experience with mental health and, you know, what led you to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder in December 2012. I was a grad student at USC in Los Angeles at the time, and I was just taking on way too much work. And I think I was trying to like work my way out of depression, which is ridiculous. But at the time, I thought that if I just took on more things, I would feel better, because I was unemployed for about a year before I went to grad school, and I was filming these rappers that I really loved. But like dealing with rappers is like herding cats. Like it's ridiculous, you know, trying to organize everything. And I was coming back from a shoot that was failed. I wasn't allowed to film there, and like pretty much from an hour away from Los Angeles all the way back, I was just speeding, and I just like wanted to die. And it was a wake up call that I needed to like really get my life together. And so I was a wreck, and I went to the college like counseling center, and they had to have 2 counselors for me because I was like so bad.
Yeah.
And they just told me that I should like, you know, drop out of grad school, and that I should get a police escort to the hospital. And in that moment, just as a Black person, I'm like, I'm scared of the police.
Yeah.
And this is a very vulnerable time. So I'm not able to protect myself in ways that I would be if I was healthier. Yeah. And so, you know, that was kind of the wake up call of like, I'm different. I'm not the one size fits all person that a lot of counseling is geared towards. Yeah. And so I kind of fought back. I was like, I don't feel comfortable with that. And I got a therapist, and that was like my first like long-term therapist, and she diagnosed me with major depressive disorder. And it just started this journey of trying to figure out my warning signs, and also trying to be preventative and trying to get ahead of the illness instead of always being like behind it. So that's when it started, like December 2012. And then when I went to Columbia the following year for nonfiction creative writing, and we had to have a thesis, we had to have this long form writing to graduate. And as a Black woman, I was like, I'm not precious. Like that's the you know, when it comes to Black people, it's almost like if you're not precious, or if you don't have this like hyper traumatic background, it's almost like what you haven't gone through anything.
Yeah.
And you know, so I was like, what should I write about? I've gone through nothing. And then I was like, oh well, I've been kind of off and on suicidal for the past couple of years. That's kind of a thing you could write about. Yeah. And so that turned into Depressed While Black. And I just started creating an online community out of it. And people ask me all the time, like, why did you start this? Why do you talk about it? But I think you might understand it too. It's for survival. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, talking about our issues is the way in which we live. It's the way in which we keep going. If I don't talk about what I'm struggling with, like, I won't be here. So the words that I write on the page is like my breath. So it's very important for me to get it out, even if it's messy.
Yeah, and that's huge. You brought up so much interesting stuff. I'm like, I don't even know which thread to follow, so that's amazing. So I guess in terms of like accessing services, and someone you talked about, you know, not being the one size fits all person, which like in the mental health community,
and I know
is like,
you can relate as well.
Yeah, but in the mental health community, that's usually like cisgender, heterosexual, white woman living with anxiety or depression, right?
Yes.
And, yeah, middle class, like able-bodied, all of those sorts of things. And I always feel like that does pose like additional challenges, because even like, you know, the diagnostic criteria that exists is based on like cisgender heterosexual white people, right?
For sure.
And so then you have all of these like, or I guess I'm pulling back to my own experience.
No, I want
bit,
you
but
to.
Like,
yeah,
like I remember, you know, being in the queer community and also having mental health issues. like the queer resources I could access didn't know as much about mental health as I did, and the mental health resources I accessed didn't know as much about queer issues as I did. So half of my appointments were like me explaining like, this is what it means. Yeah. And did you find that as well?
Yeah, I'll go into like a psychiatry appointment and be like, this is the drug I'm going to take. Give it to me. And it's sad. Like, this is the condition I think I have, so this medicine may not work, but that medicine may work. It's almost like you have to come into an appointment already knowing the agenda and setting the agenda. And it's a challenge, especially for people who deal with treatment resistant depression, which means we have a long list of medicines that hasn't worked for us, which means that we have to do some non-conventional things. And if we don't have a therapist or a psychiatrist that's willing to adapt and try new things, it's it's hard. Yeah,
they just go, this is what worked for other patients, and if it doesn't work for you, that's your problem. Right?
Crazy. Even when it comes to students like dealing with mental health crisis, sometimes it does help to go home. Like I'm totally for that. But for some people, we don't have a home. Yeah. Our homes is toxic. Yeah. We come to school so that we don't have to be there. Yeah. So it's a challenge where people kind of give you this knee-jerk advice and not know what's going on with you.
Yeah, like just go back to your very supportive family, and you're like, not everyone has that. Yeah, like, and I see that with students. I work a lot with high schools and like doing presentations and stuff, and like that's the advice that students are given as well. Like high school students is like, talk to your parents about this, they'll understand. And it's like, no, some of them won't, and they will end up like kicked out of the house and whatever. And so teachers just going like, oh, we need to bring your parents into the fold here. It's like, that's not like, again, a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you talked about some needing to do some unconventional things. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, we're at a conference hosted by Janssen. Yeah. So I don't. It's like weird because like I'm not on meds right now. Yeah. I'm taking CBD oil, which is like a non-conventional thing. It's derived from the hemp plant, and like it has like therapeutic qualities, and like it's really helped me.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's like an anti-inflammatory. So I just take a couple of drops of it under my tongue, and it's almost like immediate for me. Like I deal with suicidal thoughts a lot, and it just feels like CBD oil is like a volume control for suicidal thoughts, and then the volume just turns down. Yeah, and it's so helpful for me. The hard part is that a lot of times when you deal with psychiatrists and stuff like that, they'll say like, wait a month and let me know how it works. So I don't have a month.
You're like, I can't deal with these suicidal thoughts for an entire month.
Yeah. And so it's helpful to have something that you feel the effects that are more immediate. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I get back on meds, but I'm just taking a break right now. But that's definitely helped me. And I came from a religious household, and like anything derived from marijuana is sin. Yeah. So it did take me a while to be like, I am really messed up. I don't care what I do.
I'm willing to try it all. Like, kind of I've got nothing to lose.
Exactly. And that's what brought me there. So yeah. And anything for you that you tried?
Oh my goodness. I've tried like every cocktail of drugs. Like
how many things?
Oh my goodness. Probably like I don't have like a running tally, but I'm like probably like a dozen different medications that I've tried in the let's see, I'm 24 now. So in like the 5 years since I was initially diagnosed, and like a lot of people with bipolar disorder, I was initially diagnosed as having depression, which so they put me on antidepressants,
which make things worse.
So much worse.
They kill you.
Yeah, and so for me, it made me like extraordinarily manic. But I had been depressed for so long that I didn't realize that wasn't just happiness. I was like, oh my God, this is what happiness feels like. Like this, I can't believe everyone feels this good all the time. And so I was like, doing all the classic like manic things, like spending money I didn't have, and like hypersexuality and like impulse control and all of this kind of stuff. And I was like, being happy is amazing.
Everybody feels like this.
But then I found that my anxiety levels were really getting out of control, which is also common with mania. So I went back to my doctor being like, I'm anxious, like fix this. And they were kind of like, we need to talk.
Gosh.
Well, because they ended up putting me on a different medication, which made me very, very depressed, and they just kept increasing the dose.
Oh, they're trying to kill you.
That one was Effexor, which I don't know if you've ever
I heard like when they put me on it for a little while, and I did not like how my brain was acting
Yes.
at all.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I'm super depressed, and they kept being like, take more.
It's not working anymore.
And the thing about Effexor is that when you stop taking it or reduce
No,
the
you
amount
can't do it
taking,
immediately.
Yeah, you go
You
into
can't.
withdrawal.
Yeah,
Like, it's horrible.
serious.
And so eventually my doctor was like, I have no idea what to do with you. She didn't say it like that. She said it much nicer than that.
I feel like doctors should tell you like that.
Yeah.
Because like these doctors are expensive.
Yes.
And like I can't keep paying you so you can tell me
if you don't know.
Like,
Yeah.
tell me go to somebody else.
Yeah, and that's I think a unique challenge, especially because I'm from Canada, you're from the States,
Yeah.
where like those medical systems are quite different. Like
Very different.
I think the Canadian medical system gets really hyped up as being like amazing, which
Yes.
any of my viewers in Canada are probably like hard pass on that.
I hear that.
But
yeah.
like also the States, it's like very expensive to be ill, even.
Yes, it's expensive to
Yeah.
live here.
Yeah.
It's very expensive, and you got to do some weird things. I mean, I had a therapist who we didn't go through insurance anymore. We just kind of paid her under the table.
Yeah.
You got to do some
Here's some
weird,
cash.
like some black market stuff, like over here. It's kind of
This is my like incognito therapy that I'm
pretty much,
doing.
like, went to a closet with a little light for our therapy sessions. It was just. It's weird, but yeah, it's hard because not only do you have to think about treatment, you got to think about access and affording treatment.
Yeah.
And of course, when it comes to like the depressed while black area, black folks they don't have the same access to insurance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can be a challenge to go through the hoops of who qualifies, who's in my network, who's not in my network. And, even for a while, Lamictal was like my dream drug.
Yeah.
But it was hard because I couldn't find a psychiatrist that even like had the expertise to know about stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because like there's a lot of like kind of additional obstacles, because like we're not saying that it's easy for anyone to get access to mental health help, but like if you're trying to find like a culturally relevant person, like someone who's going to understand like some of your experiences as a black person, and then also dealing with like wage gap and economic discrimination, and you're like, okay, this is fine.
Yes. It's like so many hoops, and when you're going through a crisis, like you can barely get out of bed. So, I keep saying the mental health system, at least down here, is set up for people who are not mentally ill.
Yeah.
And it needs to be changed so that it is, welcoming and inviting and accessible to mentally ill people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a big shift. Like that would be a systemic overhaul.
We need a concierge service. We need somebody to like help plan the appointments for us.
Yeah, like a case manager, basically, to be like, I'm going to coordinate with all of these different services. Yes. So you're not on the phone with 15 different places.
And on hold all day.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Oh my goodness, that life on hold.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. You brought up something a little bit earlier that I want to come back to, which is the idea of a police escort. Because that's something. There was recently a study that came out in Canada, and I know there's a lot of issues with policing in the States as well. But there was a report that came out in Canada, I want to say through the CBC, I might be wrong about that, and it found it was a ridiculous number, and I wish I had it off the top of my head. I'll put a link to the report in the comments at the end of the show. But it was something like 40% of people who were killed by police had a diagnosed mental health issue in Canada over the last 10 years. And
it's like that down here.
But so much of what we're taught in mental health intervention is like, try to help the person, but then call the police, right? Like that's what a lot of intervention teaching teaches. And it's like, that puts so many people at risk, but where are our other options? You know what I mean? Like it's this like weird balance of like, this is me getting up on my soapbox, which like people probably won't like, so we'll find out. But like, I really do think that like I would only ever call the police as an absolute last resort. Like I think someone's going to get harmed. In any other situation where someone's living with a mental health issue, I would do something else.
It happens a lot. We have so many Black people who get slandered after they're dead. Who are mentally ill, and the cops will say, he was holding scissors, he was holding something. And then the community says, we know this person. He's like a son to us. We knew he was a little off, but he was a part of our community and he didn't pose a risk. And so you see this huge gap between the community and the police. And that's the challenge, is that I want the police to treat me like I'm a part of their community.
Yeah. Exactly.
And especially when you're in a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge. And it's been the challenge for me. I deal with suicidal thoughts. So what do I do? Who do I call? I can't be at home because I'm not safe at home.
Yeah.
And, and I guess I got to be in the hospital to be supervised. But how am I going to get to the hospital? When I call 911, is the ambulance going to come or is the police going to come?
And it's a gamble.
It's a gamble. And I'm going through all of this. And like, I need someone to take care of me. Like, I don't have, my mind is not in the place to go through all these different options of what can happen. But as a Black person, I have to go through these options of what can potentially, happen. And it's a challenge. And you kind of mentioned, like, what do you do? I mean, I feel like we definitely need to go into a more community-based model and start looking into emergency care that is from our own communities. The challenge also is mental health clinics the funding is being cut.
Yeah.
So people are being shuttled out of their neighborhoods to go to mental hospital. Like when I attempted in New York, like I was like over an hour away.
Yeah, so it's hard for your community to then
come up there
with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but I guess I would say community resources and also just preventative care. If we can figure out ways to before we get to that point of an emergency. That's my problem. Is depression makes me hopeless. Yeah. So then I don't think it's worth calling or asking.
Like what's even the point of helping? Like helping myself, right?
And like my therapist's phone number is right in my phone. I can text her. My goal is to get to that place where even before I get to that rock bottom point, like I'll talk to the people that can help me, so that I don't have to call the police. Yeah. But that's the challenge. Million people.
It's a catch-22 where it's like I need to get help so I don't get worse, but I'm already getting a little bit worse, so I don't want to get help. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think community is so important.
It is.
But we, both in Canada and the States, we live in very like hyper individualistic societies, right? Where it's like, this is a you problem.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so you need to deal with it in your way, as opposed to going like, this is a community issue. If so many people are struggling, why are they all struggling individually?
You shouldn't do that way. And I think that's another reason why I kind of hopefully developed Depressed While Black, is because we were all suffering in silence. Yeah. And it just felt like we were in these different silos, all going through the same thing. Yeah. But we didn't have the connection that would normalize our conditions. Yeah. And a lot of times that's half the battle, is just recognizing that this is something that is normal, especially amongst artists. Like as a writer, there's so many people who deal with bipolar disorder. It's like a writer's disease. Yeah. I'm almost surprised. I'm like, do I have bipolar disorder? Because I feel like I'm in this.
You're like, I'm a writer. Like statistically, I probably should.
Over-index. And so we should be talking about that. And like Mariah Carey coming out as bipolar, and like Dwayne Johnson talking about depression. I feel like the tide is turning. We just got to have the resources catch up.
Yeah, because right now it does sometimes feel like there's like a bottleneck, right?
Yes.
And like so many people are talking about it, which is great. We don't want to like say that that's bad. Like so many people are talking about it, that's amazing. But we still have this finite number of resources. And it's like, and that's how we end up with like needing to put out fires as opposed to, investing in making fireproof people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Therapies can't really be put into place when people are so busy jumping from crisis to crisis.
Yes.
Yeah, which is huge. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about, because we were talking about, we know this person in our community, they are a part of our community, they might be struggling with something, but they're a person, seeing people as people first and foremost. Do you think that like, kind of going along with the stigma conversation, like that the media kind of has plays a role in that?
They'll talk about the cell phone the person had for 15 minutes, Yeah. It's like Stephen Clark, they'll say he was holding a cell phone, but when you go into detail about how this cell phone or how this scissors look like a gun to the police, it's a one-sided presentation, and it lacks intellectual curiosity. So the next question, why did you perceive it as a gun? And why is it seems like people of color are getting the end of this compared to, the
you're like, it's not a coincidence.
Yeah, right? the shooter at Waffle House. Yeah. He was able to run free for a while. Yeah. And then when he got caught, like he wasn't bludgeoned to death. Like, and so the police can be nonviolent. It's not, I don't feel like they have the capability to be nonviolent. It's just they don't choose to be nonviolent a lot of times when it comes to people of color. Yeah. And then when you're mentally ill, it almost feels like there's a switch that goes off, like, oh, I have an excuse to do whatever I want. And if we can especially white people, like, if you guys can bring this up,
yeah,
because
well, absolutely,
because like they're not gonna. A lot of times they don't listen to us.
Yeah,
and a lot of times we're too busy almost being at the end of the gun.
Yeah, you're too busy surviving the
exactly.
system. Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, and I think amplifying voices is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we have trauma and we don't have the energy to explain our life to people. But that's something that I hope to see more of. Because when police treat Black people right, it's better for everybody.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Being having human decency and kindness is good for everybody.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Sure.
And it's one of those things where, like, we do, as people with mental health issues and as people with other marginalizations, a lot of times it's like we can't be the only ones who are are having this conversation, right? Like, because I mean, we see that in like the LGBTQ community too. We had there was a trans rights bill that thankfully has been passed, yay! Good. But I wrote my thesis on it in university, and at the time it was not passed, and it kept going to the Senate and getting shut down, and it's like, there's a finite amount of energy for trans people when we're like trying to survive, right?
The life expectancy of a Black trans woman is like 33.
Yeah.
And that's also a big frustration for me. Is like everybody's like protesting for cis hetero Black men being killed by the police, but like we have Black women in our communities that we are killing, and we're not showing up for them. And like I think the statistic is like a little over half of trans folks have attempted suicide.
Yeah.
Like this is like a major problem, but it just feels as if there's this hierarchy in place, almost like you have to earn your right to be cared for, and that shouldn't be the case, like, at all. That's the challenge, and that's a challenge for me as a mental health advocate of like step up. I think many of us Black mental health advocates, we can't just advocate for ourselves, and that's the problem. We get caught up, and there's a lot of things that I deal with. But like our advocacy should not end with us at all.
You want to have that like ripple effect, right? Where it's like I've done my part, right? Like you do yours now, and sometimes it's like, oh, I don't need to do my like my sentence. I don't need to do my part because you're doing it, right? Like so, it's not my problem. So how do you like in? Oh my goodness. Okay, this is going by so fast. So when you're like doing all this really important advocacy work, like how do you take care of yourself and like not get so burnt out that you can no longer do the work that you're doing? Like, how do you take care of yourself?
It's a challenge. I deal with comparisons a lot. That's the struggle I have, because like I'm actively going through the situation of depression and anxiety and dealing with suicidality and all this stuff. And it's hard because a lot of the advocacy work is like, I overcame depression, hooray!
Yeah, like that was an episode in my past. Yeah, that was a funny thing that happened. Yeah, and you're like,
I'm still there.
Yeah,
And I think being aware of like when I start comparing myself is probably when I need to take a step back and start focusing on my wellness and not on everybody else's. So when I start remembering that, I start going into like got an essential oil diffuser, which I love. It's like so great. I love taking baths.
Oh, me too. Just soaking.
I love lifting weights. And I love the fact that I'm doing it for myself and not to make my body look better, because sometimes that could be a challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just being in community, telling people like how I'm feeling, and also just making sure that I have time in my life to check on my friends and build strength off of each other. Yeah. So I mean, it's a challenge, but I think it all begins with me taking a step back and focusing on my needs and not comparing my needs to everybody else.
Yeah, because that's so, like, even in the advocacy world, it's like, I mean, even at conferences like this, and I'm loving this conference. I don't want anyone to think that I'm not, but like, we're having a great time. But it can be even hard with conferences like this being like, oh, like they're doing this better than I am.
Yeah, they have
like,
more followers.
They either have more followers, or they've written more books, or they've written more articles, or they're, you know what I mean? They're up on stage and I'm in the, like, you know what I mean? There's this feeling of like, I'm not doing enough. Yeah. And I think that's something that we as advocates need to like, learn to manage. I don't think it's realistic to like stamp it out of ourselves, but we need to be like, you know what, we're all like going at our same pace or like our own pace. But that's, I mean, it's easy to say that. It's like, we just need to, like, it's so much harder to do it.
Probably like live tweet, like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I suck. Be on Twitter like in 30 minutes.
Well,
but we're working on it.
Yeah, and that's, I was telling, because like we all use like social media differently, and I was like, I use Facebook for like nuanced conversations like this, but I use Twitter to be like, lol, I hate everything.
That's Twitter. It is so bad,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was so great having you. Yes, this was an amazing conversation. So if people are watching the show and they're like, oh my goodness, so amazing, really want to check this out, where can they go? Where can they hear more about what you're doing?
DepressedWhileBlack.com is a great start, and on Twitter for my rants, DepressedWBlack, and for Facebook for more nuanced conversation. That's Facebook.com/DepressedWhileBlack.
Okay, fabulous. And I will put links to all of those in the comments at the end of the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It was a really great conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it. So yeah, I'll put some links in the comments. If you liked this video, if you think that someone in your life needs to hear kind of what we talked about, feel free to, slam that share button or whatever. Again, I'm Lee Thomas. Please, if you like this show and you're like, oh, I would love to get episodes of Crazy Talk directly to my inbox, you can sign up for our mailing list, which I will also put a link to in the comments. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Bye.